Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we have with us Miles Anthony Smith, who is a leadership and career coach and author. Welcome to the program, Miles.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you having me on today.
Hey, welcome, and let's just get started with telling us a little bit about your background and your entrepreneurial vision and passion and what brought you to this point in your career.
You know, that's a great question. My father is an entrepreneur, I think somewhat by accident, not by design. He's actually a dermatologist, medical doctor, and owned a couple of different businesses. So I grew up around that and certainly experienced, the challenges and the successes, seeing him go through that. But I really got bitten by that bug, I think at an early age. I can remember a number of times going door to door selling something that I created just because I was interested in selling something and making money. I did lawn mowing. At one point, I think I had 10 or 12 lawns that I went around door to door, had monthly accounts. So I really got bitten by the entrepreneurial bug early on. I got some opportunities to work with my dad and even then run one of the companies that he created, no longer owns, but it's called Lomolux Laboratories. They have a proprietary line of skincare products. And so I've had a very varied career. I certainly have more of my career worked for other people, primarily in senior leadership roles, but there's also been a marketing component to that. So if you fast forward to today, I am an author. I've written 2 books, one called Why Leadership Sucks, the other one, Becoming Generation Flux. The former is on the challenges of leadership because it's tougher than we think before we go into a leadership role, but doing it well is worth doing, even though it's hard. And the second book was also out of my career frustrations that I've experienced working in various different industries. I'm more of a generalist, or like I like to call it, a serial specialist. So that second book is really more focused on career and how to navigate the very challenging environment we find ourselves in today.
So one thing that pops into my mind when you are describing that is what in your background not only enables you to write about leadership because you have to pick up certain skills to be able to be that specialist, but I would like to also go deeper on that point and say, do you feel that leadership can be learned and can be a competitive advantage in a business?
To your first question, the whole nature versus nurture argument, I do believe it can be learned. I think some people have a more natural inclination, and certainly through behavioral assessments, you can understand that about certain people. But it is something that can be learned and something that can be honed with intentional work and time that you spend on developing those skills, and not just learning, but then practicing. For me, the practical application is huge. And in my career, I was given an opportunity to lead a company about $2.5 million in revenue, and manage that team and be responsible for everything that went along with making sure that company grew and was, self-sustaining and was profitable. But it definitely can be learned. I think it's something that if you're going to do it at a very high level, you are continually learning. And for me, I continue to learn. You don't ever really arrive in leadership. I've had a handful of senior leadership roles with different companies, some for-profit, some non-profit, and I continue to learn to today. And I think if you don't continue to learn, that's when you aren't as an effective leader.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that you would probably have people on both sides of that equation saying, well, so that's definitely a a line in the sand. People are going to be on both sides of that. But let's say that someone succeeds and exudes, top-notch leadership. How is that visible, and could that be a stated competitive advantage for a company or an entrepreneur?
Yes, and the reverse of that, which I think really proves the point, is poor leadership is a competitive disadvantage. You can have a great team of individual performers, but if it's not a cohesive team, not a bland, uniform team, you still want to have lots of creativity, and that can create tension and within the organization, because that's part of creativity and innovation. But having a poor leadership team, someone who doesn't understand what I try to live out in my life, which is servant leadership, which can have some misunderstandings about what that means too. It certainly chooses to serve the good of the organization and the good of people. It doesn't mean that we're weak and that we don't address issues when they need to, or in some extreme cases have to remove people from the organization. Those are all parts of leadership that are necessary and that you have to do in order to effectively lead. But having poor leadership absolutely can cause an organization to not work well, and as a result, either struggle with, marketing, sales, any number of things. It can create dysfunction in that team so that it cannot achieve its business objectives. So the opposite of that is definitely true. When you have a good leadership team that knows how to openly communicate about issues, that knows how to effectively lead others to achieve those goals without running over people, that to me is a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned servant leadership. Do you feel, or can you think of an example of leadership with love, in the sense that there are times that you need to make a tough decision, and many times you can just kick someone to the side of the road, or figuratively, or step over someone in your day-to-day business. But have you thought of an example of leadership with love that would kind of exude servant leadership?
Yeah, being direct doesn't have to be mean. For me, I don't know. You want to talk about gifts? I feel like that's a gift that God has given me, is the ability to speak plainly and clearly without being mean, without being condescending, and being just in that discussion. So I can give you an example. This happens, with some frequency. We'll have an employee who's struggling in a certain area, or they're just doing something we've asked them not to do, or not doing something we've asked them to do, sitting them down. And sometimes it's a direct report or an indirect report, and I have to sit them down and say, hey, we like what you're doing here, but over here, this area needs to change. And at some point through that process that you take them through, you give them multiple opportunities, give them a genuine opportunity to make that change, give them enough time, because it's easy to rush to judgment, especially if we have taken too long to have that tough conversation. We're already so frustrated, we just want to fire them. Mm-hmm. Well, that part of that's on us. That's on me to make sure I've done my part in timely communicating that thing that needs to change, whatever that is, helping them along in that, giving them enough time, but not too much. They still need to be held accountable. And if there's multiple repeated behaviors, multiple discussions, regular discussions, timely discussions, then at that point, we owe it to the good of the organization and to the rest of the team to say, you know what, we're going to have to make a change here, and I'm going to have to let you go. And whenever I do that, I don't, and I'm not advocating doing this often, because it's not something that most organizations need to do often, but it does need to be done. And I've had to do it a number of times, and it needs to be done with as much care as possible. And it needs to be communicated in a way you recognize as the leader they're not going to take it well. There's nothing you can say that's really going to make them feel better. You just have to rip the Band-Aid off, and then I recommend, even if they've only been there a short time, give them some severance. They're not going to appreciate it probably initially. They're probably going to still be mad. It's not to make you feel better. It's to do the right thing.
Sure.
So, and I would say in leadership, that's so much. I mean, if I could encapsulate it into a statement, it's doing the right thing for that person or the organization, regardless of how it makes me feel. It's not about me, trying to feel better. Because so many times in that situation, we'll try to say things like, I know this is a really terrible thing that's happened to you. I'm sorry. But that's really trying to make ourselves feel better. That's not really doing anything for the other person. It's a very self-centered view of it. And if we're not careful, it can just make that situation worse.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And sometimes it's, just that one voice inflection or that one body language that can really enhance or crumble that time. Hey, so when you go from your varied experience in leadership to think one day in your past, I'm going to write a book. What was going on to make you make that decision? And then obviously there were obstacles. What did you experience as you were getting that first book underway?
Many obstacles, Mike. And I will say this: if you're considering writing a book, and I say this with all care, because I said it to myself, just shut up and write it. Do it. I, for too long, talked about a lot of different things, writing books, other entrepreneurial ideas that I had, but I never actually did anything. And 4 years ago, two things happened. And some people, won't agree with this, but that's okay. I felt God told me clearly, and I rarely hear God clearly tell me much of anything. Very crystal clear, you need to write this book about why leadership sucks. And the other part of it was my wife said, you just need to, she admonished me in the way I just admonished your listeners here, just shut up and do it. Do something, start somewhere. And so I set out in January of 2012 to write that book. I wrote it, edited it, and it was selling in October of that same year. So, and I say that not to, make myself look good. It was a hard process because I'd never written a book before. I had written, but I'd never written a book. And that process is hard. It's not easy. It will be challenging, frustrating. You'll want to give up. And many people, if they even start, first of all, which is a hard step, they usually don't finish because they don't have the discipline. And it's simply, it's like anything. If you're going to choose to do something, you give yourself, especially if you don't have a boss. In this case, I'm writing a book. I don't have a boss to tell me, you need to write that book. I need to have a draft by this Friday. I had to set myself and commit to myself that I was going to do this on certain dates. And I had a timeline that I worked out that I needed to get this done by. So not only did I write that book, I wrote a second book 2 years ago. I'm working on several other books, and I've also self-published my audiobook versions of my current books on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon.
Neat. And that you said a huge piece, which is you made a decision to write. You actually got into action and did it, and you got it done. I think so many times with personal development, business development type goals, you start something and then you don't finish it for many reasons, but a few of them could be, you get shiny object syndrome and you go, ooh, I need to start this and I need to start that. And then the other aspect is you need to have a really vibrant, powerful reason why pulling you to finish it up, not just, I'm going to write a book and then, it's easy to not do it if you don't have that driving force pulling you. Can you speak to those two aspects and kind of tie that into how you got that first one done, which then kind of set the stage for your other projects?
Yeah, my compelling reason is genuine desire to share what I've learned with others. So with my first book and my second book, those are born out of challenges and frustrations that I had in my leadership and career. I knew that I needed to share those with others. I certainly don't know everything there is to know about leadership or career, but I've experienced quite a bit, especially for my age. I'm an old soul, I think. My whole life, I've gone through, I think, more challenges and had more varied, deeper life experiences and leadership experiences. And that's been challenging. I really wanted to share that. I want to share that with others. Specifically, I want to share that with my kids. I'm part of writing a book. The first goal or the first reason is this is something my kids and grandkids and great-grandchildren can read years later after I'm gone. And it's a way for me this is a piece of myself. There's a lot of other things like your career and certainly memories that we all have. They're wonderful and they're great, but having a book is something hard. It's something physical. I have a physical book that I wrote that future generations of my family can be touched by. And my blog too. I mean, I hope I live a very long life, but at some point I am going to die, and I hope that legacy can live on in my writing.
It's a huge point. I agree with it 1,000%, and makes me then think of this question, which is, what do you want to be remembered as an author? What is that legacy? And I'll challenge you by saying not just I've made a difference in people's lives, because that's a great thing, but what specifically would you want to be remembered as a leadership author?
A servant. I've been fortunate, and I have a gift of service. I like to serve people. I like to entertain. I just have a sensitivity to other people and what are the ways that I can serve them that they have a strong need in. So if there's anything, what I want on my tombstone is to say servant.
Nice.
And that servant of others and that servant specifically of Christ in my relationship with him. And I want to exemplify the servant approach that he had in his life on this earth.
Yeah, I teach for 3 different universities in marketing and have coaching and consulting clients that I help with their marketing. And just literally this morning in one of the discussion forums in a class I'm teaching, we were talking about servant leadership, ironically enough, this morning. And I put in there, I said, that's a great point about servant leadership. Isn't it interesting how Christ modeled that for us in his example of washing the disciples' feet? He didn't have to do that, and it was actually probably pretty grimy if you know the day and time that those disciples were walking around in. So it wasn't like us passing the salt, at the table, and that's a kind gesture. I'm a servant. No, washing feet was not a fun task, but boy, did that give us that example of the head serving the even the bottom, which is the people who are, even the people doing the work, in other words. And also, no job is too menial for the head or the CEO. So I think we could probably talk for about 4.5 hours on that one topic alone. So we should probably land the plane, and I would just say, what are some of the best ways that people can learn more about you, your business, your books, and visit some of the things that you've prepared for them?
Well, I'll touch on what you mentioned before and then how to get in contact with me as well. I think one of the simplest ways that a senior leader, whether that's the CEO or just some other senior leader, maybe a mid-level manager, can serve their people is 2 things. trying to take the approach of doing what's best for the team and for others, not just themselves, because we all have self-interest, and that self-interest is not all bad. There's an important element of that in all of our success, but choosing to, in a sense, wash others' feet, as you mentioned, is an important element. That's really the point, too, is find ways to serve your team. Maybe that's, doing some of that more menial work that your frontline staff is doing and experiencing that for yourself. You may have watched Undercover Boss and some of the examples there of those senior leaders doing some of that more menial work, getting their hands dirty, not only literally hands dirty, but getting their hands dirty in their people's lives and understanding what's going on with them. Sometimes I found, in fact, most of the time, when somebody is acting out in work or they're not performing well, almost always there's an issue in their personal life. Not that that excuses their poor performance, but it helps us understand, and it lowers our position to say, hey, these people have problems too. Let me try to understand what's going on, and then let's deal with that issue and try to move forward. So I completely agree with the specific example you gave, and there are many other ways that, as Christ did, we can find ways to serve others. That doesn't mean we're always subservient to them or that we're weak, because Christ was not weak. There are many examples of him being very firm, very direct. So let me leave you with how to get in contact with me. You can visit my website, milesanthonysmith.com, read my blog, sign up for my email newsletter. And I'd like to make an offer to your audience, Mike, that if they go to my website, just go to the contact page, send me an email, and I will send you a free download code for either one of my audiobooks on audible.com.
Excellent. Awesome. That is a wonderful offer, and I really appreciate that. It's been a joy chatting with you, and I really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better. Thank you so much, Miles.
Thanks, Mike. You have a great day, and again, appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.